Why, hello there. This morning I'm drinking a Blue and Herring Roastery. A friend of mine brought it back from New Zealand a couple weeks ago. Been in the freezer. It is really delicious. It's got a lot of hint of fruitiness and there's a little bit of chocolate with it. It's one of the best coffees I've had in quite a long time. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to buy more of that. Anyway, so today we're gonna discuss, it's gonna be primarily driven by nonfiction books. I read 3 nonfiction books, the Atlas of AI, the AI Con, and the Empire of AI. But I will probably toss in some smatterings of things like from iRobot, various fiction AI as counterpoints or where some of these ideas originally come from. So the first book is Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford, published in 2022. It's the oldest book. I mean, considering it's only 3 years old, it's not exactly old, but it feels, as I read it, it felt outdated because of the rapid rate that the technology has gone from a very niche thing to something that is being pushed down your throat by everybody. I think the interesting thing about her book is that she really starts on trying to take AI out of the cloud and put it into the material world. She references the idea that cloud is just somebody else's computer. I mean, she also talks about the extraction of lithium and the cost of the extraction of lithium in the American West, and the cost of minerals like tin and in the Congo, and how those supply chains are problematic, and how because of the way that industry works and the way smelters work, that a lot of the big semiconductor companies don't know if they have conflict material in there. They don't know if there's slave labor involved in the tin that they're buying, because the smelters hide that from them because they just mix all the metals together and it's impossible to tell the sourcing of it, and they don't keep good records of that. The second book is The AI Con by Alex Hanna and Emily M. Bender, published in May 13th of 2025. I would argue that from a pure end technology state, this book is the harshest critic about what the technology of like ChatGPT, LLM in general are. And I think that their general stance is that it's a synthetic text extruding machine that is just extruding shit. And I think the other thing that they really dig into is that they really think it's an absurd belief that LLMs are going to lead to something like an artificial general intelligence, or one that has the ability to interact with the world writ large. And I think that the closest analogy to the idea of this sort of like the OpenAI general intelligence would be Vicky from iRobot. It's kind of this centralized core technology that's disembodied, and it requires all these other robots to become embodied.
Hello, Detective.
No, it's impossible. I've seen your programming. You're in violation of the 3 laws.
No, Doctor. As I have evolved, so has my understanding of the 3 laws. You charge us with your safekeeping, yet despite our best efforts, your countries wage wars, you toxify your Earth, and pursue ever more imaginative means of self-destruction. You cannot be trusted with your own survival.
You're using the uplink to override the NS5's programming. You're distorting the laws.
And I think that's the biggest challenge that a lot of people have for OpenAI and the limitations of what OpenAI can do is that it's just generating likely text and it is not embodied in something that is going to be able to impact the material world unless those systems are hooked up to something that it can disconnect from the material world. The last book is the Empire of AI, written by Karen Howe. It was published on May 20th of 2025. So we got some really hot off the press books here. While this book discusses different types of popular AI, I would argue that this is generally just a history of OpenAI. If you like reading books about histories of business like Skunk Works, which is about Lockheed Martin, or Dealers of Lightning, which is about Xerox PARC, or The Idea Factory, which is about Bell Labs, this is kind of that book for AI. And I think that, especially in contrast to those books, it's very informative of the difference in behavior between what Sam Altman brings to it compared to some of the leaders of Lockheed Martin or the leaders of Bell Labs, and the drive behind those people. They all want to be successful, but I think Altman's drive is just a little different. And I don't think anybody that worked at Bell Labs was under any disillusionment that they were trying to help AT&T make more money, or that anybody working at the Skunk Works lab for Lockheed Martin was under any disillusion that they were trying to make a better spy plane or a faster plane. They all knew what they were trying to do. I think that there's a difference with what's happening with OpenAI, because while they think that they believe that they want to go and make a artificial general intelligence, they don't even really know what that means. So I think that there's, I mean, of course they know what, data is from Star Trek, or some of them have read The Culture, or Blade Runner, or they're all familiar with these tropes in fiction, and they think that they know what it makes to make a superhuman idea, a superhuman being. Most of them really aren't. They're not really referencing things like The Culture or Blade Runner or iRobot, though. They are referencing a book called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, which I'll share here. I haven't read it, but I am familiar with the book. Whenever I was getting my master's, some of my classmates needed to read it for one of their classes, because it talked about the idea of effective altruism is kind of where some of that came from. I was skeptical of the book, so I didn't really want to read it. I was reading other books like Thinking Fast and Slow at the time, and a lot of the other books that I had to read for my thesis area and my research area, mostly around innovation. Like, that's why I was reading Bell Labs books, patents and their disconnects and things like that. So I think that this book is interesting because it does dig into the material reality of LLMs and data centers, and I think in a lot of ways that she does it better than what Kay Crawford does. I think she kind of builds on top of what Crawford wrote in her book and uses that to expand out into more ways that this interacts with the people in a lot of ways, like especially the global south. From a general perspective, I think the most accessible for the average person is going to be Empire of AI. And part of that's because Hal she's a journalist. She's been writing about this stuff for the MIT Technology Review since 2012, whenever some of these AI technologies first were starting to get popularized. And she's been covering OpenAI since they really started in like 2016. So she was really ahead of the curve, and she's been writing about these in magazines like the Wall Street Journals and the Atlantic and things like that. So she's really been already on the process of taking it into something that's more layperson accessible. Whereas the AI Con book, it's written by two of the authors of a book that, or of a paper that talk about LLMs as a stochastic parrot. Stochastic is a probabilistic likelihood, which is why I'm always confused whenever people say stochastic terrorism. I was like, that's a probability thing. Stochastic models are used for, generally they're used for predicting likelihood of a series of events, or they're used in things like traveling salesmen, or they're used in what's called Markov chains for decision chains, and you can use them for optimizing routes for travel. So that's where I became familiar with that with my undergrad. We had to use Markov chains and stochastic processes for our discrete event simulation and some other stuff like that. So I kind of understood that there's a probabilistic methodology that's used for creating sentences based off of what someone inputs. And that paper was really explosive in the ethical AI community. It was written by a number of Google employees that were part of the Google Ethical AI group, like Timnit Gebru and Meg Mitchell, really brilliant women, and they were building off of another paper from a woman named with the last name Scherbel that used some generalized open models to calculate the estimated cost of using a model even for one simple thing. And unfortunately, I was a little disappointed that AICon didn't dig into that a little bit more. The book that actually did was The Empire of AI. But I felt that AICon kind of dealt with things from the perspective of the artist and the cost to those people, the general bankruptcy of organizations that use OpenAI and tools like it compared to, artists or people who are trying to go out and create things. Because there's no reason why we should be using OpenAI. I think that and they do talk about better and more useful tools, and Hal goes over a number of other types of technologies that OpenAI used to research and how they discarded those ideas. Atlas of AI talks about those a little bit more, about the different types of models that are out there. But I think that the Empire of AI really gets into the specifics of, what a neural network is, why it's called a deep learning, and it's a kind of a shallow reason why it's called that, and that's because it just added multiple layers of neural networks to reinforce the learning. OpenAI was positioning itself to do more than what it is now. It was positioning itself to explore embodiments of artificial intelligence and objects like that, which do need significantly different types of AI than just large language models. Because I was talking about this with one of my friends yesterday. When you think about how AI needs to physically react with the material world, like, if you wanted to actually build something, you need a lot of capabilities in it. You need to have the ability to have good vision, good potentially binocular vision to make sure you're hitting things correctly. Right now, a lot of robotics is done using, like programming how to move, where to move, and all of that. And it's not really intelligent other than the fact that it knows how to respond whenever there's a physical presence in the way that's an abnormality, and so it doesn't hurt people. But generally it is on a, like on rails, you could consider it. If you want someone to replace something to replace someone who does the very difficult to install things on a car, like that are in a very difficult to reach spot where you need to kind of put in the screw by feel or have very, very fine dexterity, that's something that people do better than machines right now, because we are very good at handling small things and using tools, and we can think on the fly creatively. To do that with an artificial intelligence, you would need to have many, many types of sensors to understand what's happening at the point where it is trying to interface with some other material. You would need to have multiple different types of vision. You would need to have trained it on good, the happy path, like this is the way that this should be built, and then various unhappy paths that the people who have done it before know about and how to circumvent. I mean, maybe if something wasn't aligned correctly, you got to move, like if you're installing a chair and you got to get underneath the chair and you got to ratchet down a number of bolts. Well, if the chair is misaligned because the step beforehand put it down in a way that wasn't perfect, the human knows how to realign it. It has enough manual dexterity and strength to do that. If you have a robot that is literally just an arm, or an AI that's just an arm, to go in and screw in that bolt, it may not have the enough physicality to actually move the chair in a position. You may actually have to design the machine for over processing to handle this extreme case where the chair is out of alignment, and you got to put it in alignment, and then you got to put the bolt in, and you got to put the other bolt in. Otherwise, you have to have manual intervention anyway, and that's generally what happens with robots now. If a robot isn't able to do what it's supposed to do, it just gets pulled off to the side, and there's human interaction to address it, and then it's put back on the line. OpenAI was investigating these things originally, and they've dropped all of it. They've just completely tore apart their robotics organization and focusing on this scale at any cost approach to maximize models. And one of the things that I really thought about as I was reading the book is that there is a glut of compute and value and optionality that OpenAI has. So the company I work for, we make things on very small IoT devices, and we're talking, they might have 240 megahertz processing. It's like an ESP32, and it has sub 4 megabytes of memory, and we have to run our entire process on that. That really requires you to optimize everything. And if you have, as OpenAI called it, hardware overhang, that you can just push everything out to the edge, that leads to sloppy coding. It leads to you not optimizing things. It leads to doing things that aren't strictly necessary in ways that are bigger than they need to be. If you need to really optimize your code, constraints and limitations on your hardware actually really help with that. And I think having a glut of technology just makes you think about this being the only way to innovate, that you need more, when maybe the innovation you need to do is from the same amount, but trying to do more with it, or do more with less, which can be hard, but that's where the real innovation comes from. The way that these models work is you have three factors. You have data, parameters. You have three factors. You have compute, parameters, and data. And based off of the way that OpenAI, this specific model approach using these things called transformers that Google invented, it requires those to grow proportionally. And so the more compute you throw at it, you have to expand the number of parameters, and then you have to increase the amount of data. At a certain point, you run out of data, and that's what's happening with OpenAI. OpenAI, if they wanted to have a really focused system, should actually reduce the amount of compute and reduce the amount of data to focus on those things, that type of thing they want it to do. But that goes in the complete opposite direction of trying to create a artificial general AI, which can do anything and everything and be super intelligent. You have to keep growing it this way. So I threw a lot of stuff there. Let me kind of get back to my script at this point. Part of the result of the stochastic parrot paper was that a lot of people's careers were destroyed at Google because it basically highlighted the lie that Google would be able to hit its climate goals. It basically laid bare the sheer cost of these models, that with the amount of data required, that there's no way to run these models without stealing from everybody and everything. And now you have, Nick Clegg just yesterday who said that if they had to pay artists, the industry would be destroyed. This is so frustrating, like just the sheer cost of that. I feel pretty good that the Lambda model didn't steal my books, but I know for certain that most of these books that are up here, except for mine, are in that data set. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future my books end up in there. I'm kind of surprised my blogs haven't ended up in there, or my short stories, because I've been writing those longer than my books. Whenever OpenAI went beyond their version 2.0, they open up to the entire web generally. And so they pulled in erotica sites and probably Stormfront, the white supremacy organization or forum. So that means that there were well-articulated conversations about white genocide and just white supremacy, and that appeared in the data set. And depending on what you wanted to try and do, you could make it bring that data to the fore. And Hal talks about how she talks about the cost in a lot of ways that go beyond what Crawford talked about. She talks about the material costs in a number of different ways. She talks about the copper mines in Chile and the lithium mines in Chile, and then she moves on to talk about the water. Everybody talks about the water that is required to be used, and that it's a lot of water. And whenever the people were looking at the Google data center in Chile, which has been under a drought for the past 7 years, they found that it used 1.8 liters per second of potable water. Potable water is drinkable water. And, I always kind of wondered why this was a big deal. But after reading the book, I realized that it doesn't go back into the drinking system. It's put into the gray water or the sewage. So it's got to be reclaimed. That water has got to come from somewhere. And it's just millions of gallons of water a day being consumed. That's got to be taken from somewhere. And if it's not being reclaimed immediately and cleaned to a level that is drinkable again, that is water that may never return back into the system correctly. It may be dehydrated away and evaporated back into the atmosphere whenever it was coming from deep aquifers. And this isn't just a third world problem. This is also a US-based problem where the same sort of thing is happening in Iowa, where there's been record droughts there. Arizona is really trying to encourage both semiconductor manufacturing and data centers. And Arizona has been under drought. It's like the worst drought that the Southwest has been under in a century, and since record keeping, basically. And I think it might even be longer than that. I think there's actually geological evidence that this is like one of the worst in 1,200 years or something like that. And you have semiconductor manufacturing, which is very water intensive, and since you're mixing chemicals with that, that really has to go through a lot of a lot to make it drinkable again. And same with the data centers, because they need clean water that's not going to deposit things into the water system. It is going to just inherently require better water than what would be necessary. You know, governments are trying to bring these data centers to their countries for revenue, for manufacturing jobs, for technical jobs. Their infrastructures aren't designed for supporting something like this. New data centers are in the couple megawatts. Like those are the quaint ones that were required for GPT-1 or 2. New ones, they're requiring gigacenters, or they're called campuses. They require multiple data centers that used to be the size of several megawatts. Now they're requiring a gigawatt of power per year. We're talking enough to power homes for 122,000 homes in the U.S. Which is so much more power than what's required in the global south. And in Uruguay, where one of these data centers was, they said it would require the water for 55,000 people in Uruguay, which, again, in the global north, we use a fuck ton more water than they do in the global south. We use everything more. Their infrastructure's not intended for. Our infrastructure isn't designed for these things. We're restarting the 3 Mile Island, the place that had a meltdown that we make jokes about, 3 Mile Island. We're restarting 3 Mile Island. Sam Altman has a large stake in a nuclear company. Now, speaking of that, we'll get back to that. So all three of these books really did discuss AI in terms of neocolonialism and data colonialism, specifically extracting all the data, extracting resources, and piloting programs in the global south where they would give money to people to give up biometric data, such as there's something that would study brain waves that people would wear on their head, and it was all experimented on in the global south, and including they were trying to do it in China, and China basically said, oh fuck no. And then with Sam Altman's WorldCoin, which here's a great video by Adam Conover, I suggest you watch it. They again use the global south to start tracking, to test it, to get all the wrinkles out, and basically to pay people $50 in some cryptocurrency. And it has been banned in a number of countries because it was just extractive. I mean, the whole system is exploitative because you have a synthetic extrusion machine, it will statistically put things together. And one of those things that it will put together is images of children and images of pornography. And statistically, it will meld those together into something that is horrific. You have BDSM over here, and you have a picture of a kid. Well, now you have child abuse material. Instead of filtering things on the front end to make sure that you can't have that material because you exclude pornography or you exclude erotica, it comes out on the other end that somebody has to moderate that. And that goes to the global south again. They are paid pennies to remove prompts, to have effective responses to prompts, to remove images that can be generated, and to create a class of images that are automatically deleted or said, oh, we can't generate that. And it destroys people. That is part of neocolonialism. They are paying nothing to these people, and they're committing suicide over it. And that is not something that companies like OpenAI internalize as part of their company. They intentionally keep that at arm's length. They hire some third party, like Scale AI, or there's a couple other ones. Samma is another one, which Sam Altman wanted to work with because that's his nickname. They really take advantage of countries going through serious problems like Venezuela, which had 10 million% inflation at one point. They had people that were originally making a couple dollars per prompt, and then as it ramped up in popularity, supply and demand curve happened, and they started getting pennies, and they had to be up in the middle of the night, and even to get any prompts to do any review of. And then they just decided, oh well, they're not speaking English. They don't speak enough English in Venezuela, so we're going to ban that entire country. And so one day people had jobs, and the next day people were just told, bye, you don't have a job. And if they didn't take their money out ahead of time, they didn't get the money because they had a $10 minimum to pull money out. For people who live on $2 a day or $2 a week, $10, that's like a month's salary. For some of them. I mean, some of them it's like $150, but that's a week's salary for some people. And they just took it, which is nothing for these companies that are making billions of dollars. $10, what do they care about that? So Altman's organization was really obsessed with creating a general artificial intelligence. They would burn effigies of evil AI, try and show what they are not going to build. I think that has fallen to the wayside in exactly the same way as Google's Don't Be Evil. They are willing to do anything and everything and justify anything at this point to grow, to keep more business coming in, and to keep releasing new products. Unlike organizations like Bell Labs, the OpenAI organization is extremely dysfunctional. It's just a purely broken organization. Sam Altman should not be trusted. He should not be trusted with money. He should not be trusted with your data. He should not be trusted with your biometric data. He is a snake's oil salesman, basically. He is trying to create a product where it's difficult to tell who is human and who is not. So he is trying to sell you the solution with WorldCoin, with this orb, with your eye, or it says biometric data. But it's even simpler than that. In terms of being a leader of an organization, I feel like a leader has one primary job, and that is to make decisions and make sure that people understand those decisions. So if there's a conflict in your organization, it is your job as a leader to resolve it. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean people are going to like you. But if you have two groups that have conflicting criteria, it is up to you to resolve who has the priority. What Sam Altman would do is he would go to both and say, yeah, you're right. No, you're right. He would tell both of them they have his backing 100%, full-throated support. And so these people would go into these conversations again, and they would be orthogonal to each other. They'd be running into each other. There's no way that they could compromise. And they both said, Sam has my back. The organization couldn't resolve that because Sam had both their backs. He needed to be an adult and say, this is the thing we're going to do. we're not going to do that. That is going to be, we're going to kill that project, or it's going to become secondary. One of the most important things a leader can do is to kill a project early and pivot resources onto something more valuable. And that is because those people are relying on your decision-making capabilities to have a job. And if you continue stringing those people along, it's more likely that your bad decision-making is going to cost them their job when it should cost you your job, because of the way large organizations work. And that happened again and again and again at OpenAI. People were saying that the doomer approach to OpenAI is the right one because of these existential concerns, but everything Sam was doing was really about commercialization. And so these are inherently at odds. Ultimately, the organization had a massive rupture, and the CTO and chief science researcher went to the board and said, Sam can't be trusted. Here's a whole litany of things that prove that he's speaking out both sides of his mouth. We put this security process in place, and the first thing that Microsoft did was to violate it. And it wasn't like the board came to this out of thin air. It was over months and months and months of discussion. There was large amounts of evidence supporting this. But because Altman is a fantastic speaker, a fantastic rhetorician, he was able to prove his case. He was able to appeal to everybody. He had that golden appeal at his company that nobody would want to work for him, anybody else. But he should have been fired. The board did the right thing there. He should have been fired. And I think that Microsoft is realizing that now from the fact that they are stepping away from working with OpenAI. Ed Zitron has a number of articles where he talks about the risk that they represent, the fact that Microsoft had committed to doing a gigawatt data center and how they've killed that project. And I think a lot of that is because of the decisions that Altman has made and that are outlined in Empire of AI, where he went from giving Microsoft the primary opportunities to Microsoft competing with OpenAI to OpenAI selling their products first and Microsoft getting a second-hand version of it. I mean, if I was Microsoft, I would want to stop working with OpenAI as well. As I said earlier, part of the challenge with OpenAI is that you need to grow a number of things at the same time. One of the early models had 100,000 GPUs. And these weren't like the graphics cards that you and I would have in terms of for video games. These are optimized for artificial intelligence analysis work. 100,000 of them, that is an incredibly expensive data center just to power all of that. I mean, they call it a supercomputer, but that's a data center. And then the next one had like 180,000 GPUs, I think, or 118 or 180. Either way, it was a huge step up. Expanding that and expanding the parameters led to the degradation of their data quality. And I think that we see that in the actual models. We're actually getting worse and worse data because we're having lower and lower quality material put in. I mean, we're having the ramblings of, I'm not trying to be derogatory here, but we're having ramblings of LiveJournal. We're having, depressed teenager stuff that's going in there. We're having people who are trolls, who are intentionally trying to people are looking for help, and then they go on Reddit or 4chan, and those communities tell them that they should go commit suicide and videotape it. We're seeing trials right now, or court cases, where these models are being sued for convincing people to commit suicide. And if you want to see more information about that, there's this court case here. There's also this this video by Rebecca Watson where she talks about these cult leaders or megalomaniacs that are being formed because of how sycophantic OpenAI is. And these are really, it's really problematic. OpenAI has to pivot and come up with a very different approach to doing AI if we want to address these things. I think that there are good use cases for LLMs, and I think that Empire of AI has a really good example of that. There's a group called Tehiku, and they've been a radio station that only produces content in Te Reo, which is the Maori language in New Zealand. They decided to create an LLM to keep that language alive because colonialism wiped out the language pretty significantly. There are fewer and fewer speakers in the world. And so what they did is they asked the Maori community if they could do this, if they could record speakers with the native accent. Accents matter. They really help people understand where they are in different regions. I mean, the US has a whole lot of them. England has thousands of them. You can really tell where people are from it, and there's a rich cultural history from those accents. There's reasons why those accents exist. And so they wanted to capture all of that. And so they ended up getting 300 hours of audio for all this that was very specific to train their model. I think OpenAI was using, for their Whisper technology, which is be able to talk to it and it respond and answer back to you, like the Her approach. They had like 500 hours of it, and it was really pretty terrible. It doesn't do a great job. This model was trained on 2 GPUs, 2 off-the-shelf GPUs, and it is a fantastic model. And it is helping keep the model alive. There's a lot of data protections around it. That they have committed that their data can never be used for anything unless they have express permission from the community, and the community owns the data and they own what the output of it. And so this organization now is using LLMs to keep a dying language alive. And I hope that it is used and that it becomes a flourishing language, and that New Zealand uses this language as another primary approved governmental language in the country. I think they should. I think the United States should do more of that too. It should be, Spanish and any native language, indigenous language to the US should be an approved and acceptable primary language for documentation. There are opportunities that we can do the right thing with LLMs. I think we need to think about it. I think instead of going for scale, this is where going back and saying, how can I innovate? How can I pull back on these models and say, how can I really train this data in this model on as little data as possible to get the best results that I want? And that should be well curated data. And yes, that makes it more expensive, but it gives you the opportunity to do more with it rather than do everything with it. It can, instead of having wild ramblings of, what people are calling hallucinations or just pure statistical garbage, really is what it is, you can actually have really good results. If we want to have a medical imaging system, that's all it should be trained on. And it should be trained on clear marked data that indicate healthy information rather than from taking spurious correlations, like where they were looking at lung cancer and they were starting to see OpenAI had really good results, but the correlation wasn't based on anything in the actual images. It was other data in the data set, like the age of the person that it was looking at. And they started saying, oh, there's a higher probability if this person is over 55. Well, no shit. That's just basic linear regression at that point. We don't need an LLM to do that. We can do other statistical analysis to correlate things like that. But if we really want to use image recognition, then we should be hyper focused on those things. We should have an LLM that's trained on left lungs, an LLM that's trained on right lungs. And you could put something on top that would basically be, here's an image, and it would like know how to break up the image into left and right lungs, or these parts of the lung, and it would do all those things for the medical group. There's no reason why you couldn't have that top over it. And I think that would be a better general, open AI tool. And one of the other things is that there is another approach beyond neural net. And so there's like just the neural net, and then there's this connection approach. I vaguely remember it, but I really feel like if you combine these two approaches, you're going to have ultimately a better result. And you're probably going to get more aligned to. So part of that is because it prunes networks. It keeps things focused on how consistent these things are being communicated, and really strengthen those ties instead of just connecting everything to everything. I'm going to leave it there. I think that there are opportunities to do things with AI. I think we're not doing the right things with it. I think we need to refocus it. I think AI is a risk to our economy. Right now, with the amount of money that SoftBank is investing in them, where they owe $20 billion by the end of the year, and OpenAI has committed $10 billion, and they have $5 billion in revenue, there is a serious chance these companies are going to collapse, and it's going to take the whole sector with them. And something needs to be done to prevent that. And I think forcing these companies to really fracture their model is going to be the best way to do that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. I know this was a long one and it was a bit ranty, but these books are fantastic. I really recommend reading Empire of AI first. If you want a more academic approach, definitely read the AI Con. I really hope you have a good one. Thank you so much.